What's up, smart homers? My name's Aaron, and in this video I want to show you 18 different mmWave sensors. These are sensors that use mmWave radar to detect even the slightest of human movements, like breathing. I'm going to compare their prices and features, and then I'm going to show you how they work in my smart home platform of choice, Home Assistant. I'll show you some of the testing I've done on these devices, and then I'll tell you which ones are my favorites and which ones are my least favorites. If you don't use Home Assistant, I can't guarantee that these are going to work for you. For all these devices, I tried to avoid those that rely on cloud connectivity because if that company goes bust, you may not have access to your device anymore. Also, while a couple of these sensors work on Wi-Fi, most of them work on Zigbee, which is another wireless protocol, and you need a smart home hub that has a Zigbee radio in order to use these. Also, none of these devices use battery because mmWave sensors are active unlike passive infrared sensors, and so they're always sending out that radar. That would make for a short battery life. One other note, in Home Assistant, I'm going to be using Zigbee to MQTT for all these sensors because for all the devices, they have the same or better functionality in Zigbee to MQTT. The first one we're going to look at is the ZY-M100-S. This sensor has a nice clean look that I think can blend in well with a modern smart home. It has a white and gray aesthetic that reminds me of Aqara devices, but maybe a little less polished looking. On the front, you have an icon that indicates it's a human presence sensor, and on the back, you have some device info and some ventilation holes. The front also has two holes, one for light level sensing and one for an LED. The bottom edge has a pairing button and a USB Type-B port. For powering it, it comes with the cable but no adapter. The seller that I bought this device from provided an adhesive stand to mount it to a wall or horizontal surface, but if you end up buying it from somewhere else, you could buy a stand separately on AliExpress for like $1. In Home Assistant, you get illuminance, presence, and target detection sensors, but you also get options to adjust radar sensitivity, minimum and maximum detection ranges, detection delay, and fading time. Despite this being a fairly cheap sensor, it has quite a few adjustment options. My testing showed that the target distance data was not very accurate, so I wouldn't rely on that at all, but it has the sensitivity adjustments and the detection delay adjustments to really dial this in for a living room sized room. The next one is very similar, except for it's a ceiling mount instead of a wall mount. It has a round flat face with a lip that extends a little bit wider than the body of the device. The front has two holes like the previous device, one for light level sensing and one for the status LED. The two orange flipper arms are spring-loaded, and the idea is that you use a hole saw to cut a hole in your ceiling, fold the arms against the body, pop it into the hole, and then the retaining arms will snap into place, holding it against the drywall. You need a 2-inch or 50mm diameter hole in your ceiling for this device. On the back, you'll also notice that this has two spring terminals for line and neutral wires, because this device is powered by 8 to 250 volts AC rather than 5 volts DC. It also has a pairing button back there as well as some device info. To get this thing working, we need to connect power, and while this would typically be hardwired once installed in the ceiling, I'll just test it out by connecting it to a short electrical cord. This would be the same with residential wiring. To insert the wires, you just depress the spring terminal, slide the wire in, and release. Do this for both the line and neutral wires, and then plug it in if you're using a cord, or turn the breaker back on if you're installing it in the ceiling. If you look at the side of the device, you'll see an LED flashing through the side wall, and that should indicate that it's in pairing mode. If it doesn't flash, hold the pairing button on the back until it does. In Home Assistant, you get illuminance, presence, and target distance sensors, and options to adjust radar sensitivity, minimum and maximum detection ranges, detection delay, and fading time. I really like the idea of a ceiling-mounted sensor, and this one is pretty inconspicuous. With the style being mounted in the ceiling, you'd think that target distance measurement wouldn't be that big of a deal, but this device had surprisingly accurate target distance, much better than its wall-mounted brother. The next device takes things to another level in terms of features. It appears to be meant for use in a ceiling mount application, but the feature that really stands out is its alarm capability. The device is puck-shaped, but it comes with a stand that can either be mounted with adhesive or screws. One thing I really like is that they provided an extra long USB Type-B cable for the 5 volts DC that it requires, so you hopefully won't need to buy a cable separately. It also comes with a reset pin tool because that's how you put it into pairing mode. On the back of the device, you can see a bunch of speaker holes because this device has a 120 decibel alarm. The alarm can be set to a couple different modes, where regular is a typical alarm sound, and the doorbell mode plays a tune. On the edges of the puck, you can see a translucent ring, which actually has some LEDs behind it, and it will flash at different times. There are 2 holes on the front like we saw with the previous ones. At least one of them is for illuminance sensing. In Home Assistant, you get presence, motion, and illuminance sensors, and a ton of fine-tuning adjustments, including fading time, large motion detection distance and sensitivity, small motion detection distance and sensitivity, static detection distance and sensitivity, and also has an alarm mode. This can be set to 4 different modes: off, arm, alarm, and doorbell. Off plays no sound, arm triggers an alarm when presence is detected, alarm turns the alarm on until it's turned off, and doorbell plays a tune. You can set the alarm to 4 different settings: mute, low, medium, and high, and you can also set how long the alarm will sound in minutes. You can also turn the light mode to off so the LED indicator doesn't flash if that's annoying to you. So this alarm is really loud, and I can see how it could be used for scaring away intruders, but I'm not sure that I would want to use a presence sensor for that. The only thing I wish they would add to this sensor is a target distance entity, as that could be super useful if this was an accurate sensor. This next sensor is one of the ugliest I've ever seen. It's almost like they bought a project box and then they stuck a sensor inside of it. It's a huge square-shaped box that's solid black, but the front has a tinted plastic window on it. The back has a slotted hole for a wall or ceiling mount, and you can also see the reset or pairing button on the back. On the side, you can see the USB Type-B port for powering the device, and it comes with a decent length cable. In Home Assistant, you get the bare minimum. You get presence, duration of attendance, durations of absence sensors, and an LED state toggle to turn off the LED. That's literally it. I'm not going to waste any more time on the sensor. I'll just tell you that it would randomly detect motion when there wasn't, and sometimes when I walked into a room it would stop detecting motion, and it's pretty much garbage. This next sensor is pretty unique, with a circular design that makes it look like a smoke or carbon monoxide detector. It comes with some screws and anchors, and also a 3M adhesive pad for adhesive mount. The front has a circular cover, and the cover has a translucent white window for allowing the light from the underlying LEDs to be seen. It also has a section with perforated holes, but I'm not really sure what they're there for unless this is just a repurposed smoke detector shell. On the back, you can see a hole for some terminals for line and neutral wires, because this device is powered by 85 to 265 volts AC. To remove the cover, simply twist the face of the device and it will come right off. Underneath, you can see the terminals more clearly, and you can also see the status LEDs and a pairing button. It also gives you access to the holes for screw mounting the device to the ceiling. There are 4 terminals, 2 for power and 2 for passing power through the device, and I'll explain what this is for in a bit. To power this thing up, you just connect the wires to the terminals. Like I did with the mains power sensor we looked at a few minutes ago, I'm just going to use an electrical cord to power this one. Once you install the wires or cord, you can plug it in or turn on the breaker. I actually messed up here and didn't pass the wires through the hole in the back of the sensor, so the lid won't go back on. Make sure you pass the wires through that hole first before you connect it to the terminals, or else it's going to be a bit of a pain. When you plug it in, the LED on the front will turn red for a few seconds and then switch to blue, and then it will start flashing. It's automatically in pairing mode, but if it isn't, hold that pairing button on the front of the device for a few seconds. In Home Assistant, you get presence, illuminance, and target distance sensors, and you get quite a few controls. You get radar sensitivity, entry sensitivity, illuminance threshold, detection range, shield range, entry distance, indentation, entry filter time, departure delay, and block time. Entry sensitivity is set to filter out minor movements at the edge of the sensing range. Entry distance indicates the distance from the edge of the detection range that you want to filter. Entry filter time is used to say how long an entry should be detected before it's considered such. Departure delay is how long it should wait when a target disappears before it says there's no longer presence. Shield range is the space closest to the sensor that you want to ignore presence. Block time is like a cooldown before presence can be detected again. It also has breaker status and breaker mode. Breaker status allows you to turn the internal relay on and off. This is where the 2 extra terminals I told you about come in. Powering a light from those terminals will allow you to turn on and off that light by changing the breaker status. Now, let's say you want a light to come on when presence is detected. You can set the breaker mode to local, And when presence is detected, the internal relay turns on, sending power to the connected light. That's kind of cool. The illumination threshold controls the internal relay as well, and setting this will keep the internal relay on if the actual illuminance of the room is below the threshold. Finally, we have status indication, which turns on or off the LED that flashes when presence is detected. One thing I really like about this device is that it looks like a smoke detector, like I mentioned, and it really helps it blend into your home. People wouldn't even know that it's detecting presence. If they could just add a smoke detector or carbon monoxide detector into that device, it would be super cool, making it just perfect. The next one also is rather unique. It has a tall, slim body with a radar symbol in the center of it, and a small window at the top for illuminance sensors. On the back, you can see some info about the device, and on the bottom, you can see the micro USB Type-B port for powering it and a pairing button. This device didn't come with any adhesive, so you need to have your own if you want to stick it to the wall. Based on its design, it appears like it should be stuck in a corner because it has this 90-degree corner shape to the back of it. Just to note before we get this thing paired, this device is not officially supported yet in Zigbee to MQTT and Home Assistant, so it's not going to function the way it will maybe by the time it's actually supported. In Home Assistant, you get presence, target distance, fading time, and illuminance sensors, as well as 3 flags: breathe, small, and large. These flags refer to the amount of energy that a target emits or the amount of movement that the target has. These flags are supposed to turn to true when there's that type of movement, but I don't think they really work right now. There are also a bunch of adjustment options: detection delay, how long presence should be detected before the presence entity says it's true, radar sensitivity, how much energy should be considered true presence, keep time, presence should stay true for a certain amount of time before checking again, and finally, min and max detection ranges. While I do like the look of this sensor, it only has a 90-degree field of view, and I think that's because it's supposed to be mounted in a corner. But to me, that's a bit limited if you didn't want to use it in the corner. Also, the documentation says it's a 2.4 GHz sensor, which is kind of weird since typically it's either 5.8 or 24, but whatever. The next one I've nicknamed the eyeball sensor because it kind of looks like an eyeball. It has a circular white body, but the front has a black oval shape with a radar-style pattern on it. The back of the device is actually a backplate that twists off and has 2 holes in the plate for screw mounting. Underneath the backplate, you can see a pairing button as well. Once again, it comes with adhesive as well as screws, so you can choose how you want to mount it. It also comes with a decent length USB Type-C cable, which makes it easier to power. In Home Assistant, you get illuminance, presence, and target distance sensors, and you also get typical controls for radar sensitivity, min and max ranges, detection delay, and fading time. There's also a radar scene option, which would adjust the controls for different settings for bathroom, bedroom, and sleeping scenes. Detection delay is super important, of course, because it helps you filter out false triggers. To me, this is one of the worst looking sensors, and if you're going for obscurity, this is not the one to choose because it looks like a massive eyeball. Despite its looks, I've been pretty impressed with this sensor as far as the different adjustments you can make and also the target distance measurement. So this one I think is the best looking of all the sensors we're going to look at today, and it's the Linptech ES1 presence sensor. It is also rebranded as a Moes sensor in some cases, but this one was sent to me by Linptech to test out. They actually sell 2 versions, one that communicates over BLE mesh and the other one that communicates over Zigbee. And I started out by trying the BLE mesh sensor, but I couldn't get it to communicate with the Xiaomi Gateway 3, which it's supposed to work with, so it's kind of useless to me. This Zigbee device reminds you a bit of the Xiaomi Aqara type construction, the clean white body with the gray accents. The front of the device has a gray section with a hole in it for illuminance sensor, and there's an LED behind it as well that flashes when presence is detected. The gray section is also a button and is used for pairing. It has a metal base that's attached magnetically to the back of the sensor, and the base can be mounted with a supplied adhesive. The magnetic base allows for swiveling and tilting of the entire body of the device, which is really nice. It also comes with a nice long USB-C cable for power. One thing to note with this sensor is that it was not compatible with Zigbee to MQTT when I first bought it, but we just got it added recently, so when you're watching this video, it's going to be supported. In Home Assistant, you get sensors for occupancy, which is presence, illuminance, target detection, and presence keep time. Presence keep time is how long presence has been detected for. You also get adjustments for motion detection distance, motion detection sensitivity, static detection sensitivity, and fading time. Motion detection and static detection refer to smaller and larger amounts of movements being detected. Fading time is like a cooldown, how long it waits until it checks again for presence. So like I said, this one is a really good looking sensor. The one issue I have with it is that LED on the front that flashes when presence is detected, you can't turn that off. Target distance was pretty accurate too, but the frequency that it reported target distance wasn't great. The next one that we're going to look at is one of the most unique devices in this comparison, and it's the Highlink HLK LD2410. First, it's the cheapest of all the devices I've shown here, and second, it works via Bluetooth. You can see it's just a PCB with the mmWave sensor attached and has no case or housing. We'll do something about the housing in a bit. It comes with a USB-C cable of decent length for power, and it has red and green status LEDs on the board. You can also see that the mmWave sensor is a little loose on the board, so you need to be careful. When you plug in the USB cable, a red light and a green light come on. There's no actual pairing at this point, but now it should show up in Home Assistant as an automatically discovered device, and you can go ahead and add it to Home Assistant. If you're placing this device far away from your Bluetooth radio, you might want to consider setting up a Bluetooth proxy. In Home Assistant, you get a ton of entities. There are sensors for detection distance, motion, moving target distance, moving target energy, occupancy, static target distance, and static target energy. You also get a bunch of motion energies at different gates. The sensing range of this device is broken up into gates, and it tells you the energy of motion at each of those gates. These entities are all disabled by default, but you can enable them. And then you can tune this sensor using the Highlink HLK Radar app. Once you have the app installed, you can tune each of the gates so that you don't get false triggers. You connect to the device via Bluetooth, turn on engineering mode, and then adjust the gate sensitivity for each gate. For each gate, the closer the value to 100, the less sensitive the gate. The best way to tune it for me was to set them all to 100 and then slowly bring each of the gates down until only human presence is detected and you have no false triggers. I found this device to be extremely sensitive before tuning and still had a couple false triggers after tuning. There's definitely still some more work to do for me in setting this one up. If you want to 3D print your own housing for it like I did for mine, I created a design for this on Thingiverse and I'll leave a link in the description. Next, we have the Athom PS01. It's a really clean looking device, probably maybe the second best looking device of all the ones we looked at in this video. And right away you can see that it has a traditional PIR motion sensor in it, as well as a mmWave sensor. On the front, it has a window in the upper left corner for illuminance sensing, the main Fresnel lens in the center for the PIR sensor, and on the bottom it has a hole for an LED to show through. On the back it has the USB-C port for power, and it has slots on the back and bottom for the provided mount. The mount can be attached easily to the device, either on the bottom for mounting to a horizontal surface or on the back for mounting to a vertical surface. The mount can be attached to the wall either with the adhesive or with the screws provided. It also comes with a right-angled USB-C cable for power and its own adapter, which is really nice. On the side, there's a hole for a reset pin. Like I mentioned, this device is a Wi-Fi device and it's running ESP Home. The first thing you'll need to do is plug in the power. The LED will start blinking blue, and that means it's time to add it to your Wi-Fi network. It's easiest to do it on your phone. Just search for available Wi-Fi networks for the one that's named Athom Presence Sensor and connect to it. It'll bring you to a sign-in page with a list of nearby Wi-Fi networks. Choose your home Wi-Fi network and enter the password. When finished, press Save. Go to Home Assistant, tap Settings, Devices and Services, and you'll see the Athom sensor is automatically discovered by Home Assistant. Click Configure, click Submit, set an area if you want, and click Finish. In Home Assistant, you get your illuminance, mmWave, PIR, and occupancy sensors. From what I understand, the PIR and mmWave sensors are used together to set the state of the occupancy sensor. For configuration options, you also get blockade time, detection delay, fading time, farthest detection, maintain sensitivity, and trigger sensitivity. All of these are similar to what we've already shown with previous sensors for adjustments. There's a hidden toggle for turning the LED on and off, which is cool, but it doesn't seem to keep the LED off. The LED comes back on as soon as presence is detected. There are also some diagnostic entities that have some network information. I really like this device, but I do wish it had target distance as an entity, since that can be pretty useful in automations. And from the other sensors, all having it seems like it wouldn't be that hard to add. Millimeter wave and PIR sensors are great to use together because PIR sensors are excellent for distance and quick detection, and millimeter wave sensors are great for smaller movements and detecting human presence staying in an area. However, this isn't the only one that has both in a single device. The next one similarly has both in one unit, and I think this one actually came out before the Athom sensor. The Everything Presence 1 is the presence sensor that for me started it all. Everything Smart Technology was kind enough to send one to me to check out. First of all, this device doesn't come pre-assembled, so you get to assemble it yourself. Don't worry, it's super easy. First, you have the main EP1 board, which is nicely labeled to show you where the components belong. And you can see that there's an ESP microcontroller on the board. There's also a jumper for the board that lets you power it via a 5-volt header rather than the USB port, but that's a little bit more advanced and not something I want to look into. Next, you have the PIR sensor, which can be fairly easily mounted to the board with 3 pins. And finally, you have the 24 GHz millimeter wave sensor, a DF Robot SEN 0395 module. It comes with an optional 3D printed case and mount, but you can 3D print it yourself because they've made the files free to download. To assemble it, you can actually scan the QR code on the box and follow the instructions on the EP1 website, but it's pretty easy and straightforward to assemble. You put the board into the case and then you add the millimeter wave module and PIR sensor. Once the components are installed, you can add the cover and attach the stand. Adding this device in Home Assistant is the exact same as the previous sensor because it too runs on ESP Home. In Home Assistant, you get a ton of sensors. You get humidity, illuminance, millimeter wave, occupancy, PIR, and temperature sensors. And to me, this thing is more of a multi-sensor than most of the multi-sensors that I've tested in the past. You also get a ton of different configuration entities, including ESP32 LED and millimeter wave LED toggles, a toggle to turn off the millimeter wave sensor, a firmware version entity, humidity, temperature, and illuminance offsets, millimeter wave distance and sensitivity adjustments, millimeter wave on and off latency adjustments, occupancy and PIR off latency adjustments, and finally restart and safe mode buttons. The most important setting to get right first is the millimeter wave on latency, which prevents false triggers. A good place to start with this setting is 0.5, but if you need some tips, Everything Smart Technology has made a guide that you can follow on their website. Overall, I think this sensor could be improved with a better design of the case. I think this one kind of looks a little ugly, and I know some people have already made some different designs, so it's worth checking online to see what other people have made. Other than that, the price is a bit tough to swallow for a presence sensor, but if you look at it as a multi-sensor, taking the place of temperature, humidity, and all sorts of other sensors, it's actually not too bad. Also account for the fact that you can swap out different sensors like the millimeter wave module and the PIR module. The next sensor is another newly released device from Everything Smart Technology, and that's the Everything Presence Lite. It's called the Lite because it doesn't have the PIR sensor that the EP1 has. This one also comes with a right angle cable, unlike the EP1, which didn't come with any, at least when I got it. Everything Smart Technology sent this to me a little bit early, so I think they may have changed the right angle cable color. If you pop open the cover, you can see the custom EPLite board with the millimeter wave sensor attached, a Highlink LD2410. This sensor is also powered by ESP Home, so adding it to Home Assistant is the exact same as the previous sensor. In Home Assistant, you get controls for the ESP32 LED, setting max distance, and setting occupancy off delay. You also get sensors for illuminance, occupancy, and target tracking for up to 3 targets. The target entities are the target angle, distance, resolution, speed, and X and Y coordinates. Lastly, you get the ESP reboot and firmware entities as well. The price point for this device to me is perfect, and this sensor is by far the most accurate when it comes to target distance measurement. You can swap out the millimeter wave sensor though if you want to try something different, and it's compatible with at least 5 different millimeter wave sensors. Another awesome feature is that out of the box, this device works as an ESP Home Bluetooth proxy for Home Assistant. This will help extend your Bluetooth range for picking up devices in your home. This feature apparently is also going to be coming to the EP1 as well. The next one is the Aqara FP1. You may have heard of the younger but better brother to this one, the Aqara FP2, and we'll get to that one in a minute, but this one is Aqara's original attempt at a presence sensor. Out of the box, you get the sensor with a hardwired cable, a US power adapter, an adhesive pad, and a metal plate for magnetic mounting of the sensor. It has the typical Aqara look with a white body and gray accent. The gray stand is permanently attached to the device, and it articulates so you can adjust the angle and tilt of the sensor. In the center of the back, it has a pairing button, and on the bottom of the stand, there's a QR code for use with the Aqara app. In Home Assistant, you get presence, device temp, power outage count, and presence event entities. You get config options for monitoring mode, motion sensitivity, and reset no presence status, which I'm not sure what it really does. It also gives you the ability to add detection regions, but it's not visually representative, so it might be difficult to understand what it's doing. As I understand it, the field of detection is broken up into a 7x4 grid of zones, and then for each region that you want to set up, you can add the individual zones of your choice to be part of that region. It's a bit labor intensive to add all the zones to each region, and I'm not sure it even works because I couldn't get presence to be detected in those regions specifically, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Another issue I had with this device, besides setting up the regions and zones, was that the cooldown time was pretty long and there seemed to be no way to adjust it. The next one is the Aqara FP2. Out of the box, you have the sensor, the USB Type-C power cable, a metal pad for mounting the device, and also the adhesive pad. You can see that this device is more of a hockey puck shaped sensor than the other one, and this one has an LED indicator on the edge of the face of the device. The integrated stand is a little bit different than the FP1 in that it doesn't rotate and only tilts. And this causes a little issue when you want to stand up the sensor on a horizontal surface. The Aqara logo ends up upside down, which is strange and a bit annoying, but not a deal breaker. You can also see that the stand has a HomeKit pairing code on it, and that's because this device actually works over Wi-Fi with HomeKit, unlike the FP1 that works over Zigbee. The base of the stand also has a hole in it, and that's so you can screw mount it with the provided screw. The Aqara FP2 works with Home Assistant via the Apple HomeKit integration, and before we add it to Home Assistant, we have to add it to the Aqara app. When you plug in the power cord, the pairing light will begin flashing rapidly. In the app, tap Add Accessory and then choose the FP2 sensor. Walk through the setup steps in the app to get it all set up. One of the cool things you can do with the app is set up detection zones, similar to how the FP1 zones are set up, but a lot easier. Once it's set up, head over to Home Assistant, where you should see the device discovered via the HomeKit controller integration. Click Configure and then enter the HomeKit pairing code when asked and click Submit. Choose a room if you'd like and then click Finish. In Home Assistant, you get an illuminance sensor and multiple presence sensors. The first individual presence sensor represents the entire detection area, and the others are the respective zones that you set up in the app. As you set more up, you get more presence entities showing up in Home Assistant. I actually had a ghosting issue with this sensor where it was saying there was a target in the room in a certain location on the zone map, but there wasn't. There was a software update that I saw that seemed to make this a little bit better, and it also helped with the cooldown time, which wasn't great. This next one is one that popped up on AliExpress and caught my attention because it said it worked for Home Assistant. It's a pretty generic looking sensor with a white square body and the human presence graphic on the front. It has two holes on the front as well, one for illuminance sensing and one for an LED. On the bottom edge you have the USB-C port for power and you have the pairing button. In Home Assistant, you get presence, illuminance, and motion state sensors, and you get adjustments for large, medium, and small motion detection sensitivities and distances. You also get a toggle for the LED indicator. I really don't have a lot more to say about this sensor, so let's just move on. Next, we'll look at another sensor that runs ESP Home, and that's the Screek 2A human presence sensor. Out of the box, you get the sensor, adhesive pads, and a USB-C cable. The sensor body definitely feels 3D printed, maybe with a resin printer, but feels high quality. You can see that the case must be thinner in the middle because you can just barely see the sensor behind the case, and that's probably for luminance measurement if I had to guess. The back of the case has two holes, but I'm not really sure what they're for. There's also a sticker on the back that points you to their website that has more info on the sensor, including setup instructions. Since this sensor runs on ESP Home, you follow the same process as we did with the Athom EP1 and EPLite. You get entities for target count, presence in any zone, illuminance, target resolution, speed, and X and Y for each of the three possible targets to track. And you also get presence and target count entities for each zone that you specify. In the configuration section, you get the ability to set the zones by distance from the sensor. You get a toggle for the status light, and a few more entities regarding the microcontroller. There are so many options here that it's hard to get a handle on everything you can do with this sensor, but the documentation on the Screek website should help. This sensor is actually rocking the LD2450 under the hood like the EPLite, but I did notice that the target distance is reported not nearly as often as the EPLite, kind of making that a little bit useless. The next two sensors and the last two are fairly new, so I've had a lot less time to play with them than the other sensors, but I'll still go over what I've seen. The Sonoff Zigbee presence sensor is a much anticipated sensor, only just recently released. I reached out to them and they were happy to send one for me to play with. Out of the box you get the sensor, a magnetic base, some screws and adhesive, and a power cable. The sensor itself looks an awful lot like a motion sensor actually, with the frosted lens on the front. We know radar sensors don't need lenses, so I'm not sure what's up with it. The sensor also has a pairing button on the top and a USB-C port on the bottom. The magnetic base looks pretty cool though, as it not only holds the sensor, but it allows it to articulate. I ran into an issue with this though, and that is that the friction between the sensor and the base is so small that the weight of the cable can pull on the sensor and move it. A stronger magnet would probably fix this. In Home Assistant, you really only get one important entity, and that's occupancy. Honestly, this was a little bit of a letdown as I expected some sort of control over the sensitivity settings. From what I can see on the website, you can adjust the sensitivity in the eWeLink app, so hopefully this functionality comes to Zigbee to MQTT or ZHA in the future. I was pretty much done with testing sensors at this point when I got an email from Apollo Automation. They have just released a presence sensor and they wanted me to check it out. This one is the MSR1 and it has some interesting features. It comes with 3 different 3D printed cases of different colors, a couple different mounting options with an articulating stand with screw holes or adhesive to mount it. It also has another mount that's pretty cool. It's a wall adapter with a custom USB cable. It allows you to use the power brick like a wall mount or an outlet mount, attaching the sensor to that wall wart. You can remove the back by sliding it off, and if you pop the case off, you can see that it has a custom board with the LD2410 attached to it. This custom board also has temperature and humidity sensors, a lux sensor, a CO2 sensor, and even a piezo buzzer that can play tunes. Super cool. It also has an RGB LED on it, which is something you really don't see on these sensors. If you want to, you can slide the articulating mount onto the back for mounting it to the wall in the future. This device is powered by ESP Home, so it's straightforward to set it up. Plug it into power, and then you gotta wait about a minute for it to get ready, and then connect to the AP it broadcasts with your phone or PC. In Home Assistant, you get so many sensors it's a bit overwhelming. You got humidity, air pressure, temperature, lux, CO2. You also get calibration and offset adjustments for these. On top of that, you obviously get your presence sensor, still and moving target sensors, target distance sensor, and 3 zone sensors. In configuration, you can set your zones, but you also get 8 gate threshold settings. If you remember these from the HLK LD2410, these gates are used with the gate still and move energy sensors while in engineering mode to tweak the entire sensing field of the device, dialing it in exactly the way you want. There's a ton more to this sensor, but that would take a separate dedicated video, I think. One of the cool things about this sensor is that it has an RGB LED on the custom board that can be controlled by Home Assistant. So one thing I forgot to mention is that this device has a little piezo buzzer on it, and in Home Assistant, you can send commands to play tunes on it using RTTL commands. Super cool. What I also like about this sensor is that it uses ESP Home and Home Assistant to handle setting up the LD2410, so you don't have to connect to it with Bluetooth via the HLK radar app and dial it in like we did with the 2410 kit. Although the sensor is pretty new, the Apollo team does have some decent documentation, so definitely check that out if you're trying to figure out how to set this thing up. Okay, so now let me show you the results of some testing I did. For each of these sensors, I tuned it to pick up human presence in the room that I'm working in, the open basement, and then I did all my testing. That means that there shouldn't be any false triggers in my testing. I checked response time and cooldown time in Home Assistant. I checked target distance accuracy if there was a target distance entity, and a bunch more. For the response time testing, they were all within seconds of each other, but I did notice that the Athom and the EPLite responded quicker at a distance because of that PIR sensor. When you look at standard cooldown time though, this is where you see a bit of a difference. Most of them actually had decent cooldowns, with the exception of a few Tuya sensors that had cooldown times that were a bit long. The ZG-205ZL and the YXZB had cooldowns of 3 and 2 minutes respectively, but I was able to actually dial those in and drop them a bit. The other sensor with a massive cooldown was the Aqara FP2, coming in at 4 minutes, but it may have been the ghosting. I'm not sure if this is the standard cooldown or what, but it did take forever to clear up. After that firmware update I talked about, it seemed to be a little bit better. Next, I did a rough test of target distance, laying out a tape measure and marking out a series of positions at 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 meters away from the sensors. This test only looked at the ones with target distance entities, so some of the sensors I really wanted to try with this couldn't be included. For the EP1, I used the beta firmware to test the target distance. The most accurate by a mile was the Everything Presence light, which had a beautiful staircase when I stood at 5 meters, waited 20 seconds, stepped to 4 meters, waited 20 seconds, etc., and then went back out to 5 meters. The light was followed closely by the Apollo MSR1, the Everything Presence 1, and the one Tuya one that mounts in the ceiling. That was surprisingly accurate. The Linptech was pretty accurate too, but had a sample rate that was pretty low. The rest were really not that accurate and jumped all over the place, except for there was the YXZB. I also noticed that all of the sensors except for the Apollo and the Everything Presence light had less accurate target distance measurements when you walked away, which is really strange. I'm not sure why this happened, but even the Everything Presence 1 experienced this. One other request I heard from people is that I test how the sensor works with small pets. Since humans live in this house and not animals, I decided to use my son's Jurassic World remote-controlled Jeep to test this out. Most of the sensors didn't even react to this Jeep ripping around the basement, so I'm going to say that these probably aren't too great for pet detection, at least down on the floor if you have these mounted on the wall where I do. I also compared the illuminance on all these sensors, and honestly it's just all over the place. I started with the lights out and checked the illuminance levels, and they're all different from each other. And then I turned on the overhead lights, and they all changed, but they're still all different. And then I put some direct light right up in front of them, and they all changed some more, but again, all different. Okay, so now let's talk about my favorites and my least favorites. But don't forget, I left links to all of these in the description. If you're just looking for a super cheap sensor, I would try the Highlink HLK 2410. You can 3D print the case if you want and dial it right in. If you want a cheap sensor, but you want to use Bluetooth, then I'd recommend the ZY-M100-S, as it's pretty feature-rich for the price. The best for the price, in my opinion, is a tie. The first winner is the Athom PS01, since it has both PIR and mmWave sensors and still comes in at under $40. The second winner is the Everything Presence Lite, as it also has a temperature sensor and is under $40. If you prefer a Zigbee device, the best for the price to me is the Linptech sensor. If you're looking for the one that has the most features and sensors in one device, it's a really close one between the Everything Presence 1 and the Apollo sensor. While the Everything Presence 1 has a PIR sensor, it's quite a bit more expensive and it doesn't have a CO2 sensor. The Apollo lacks the PIR sensor, but it has the CO2 sensor, the piezo buzzer, and the customizable RGB light. Between the two of them, it just depends on what you want to use them for. As far as price for these sensors, add up the total cost it would cost you if you bought all of those individual sensors as individual devices and see if the price is worth it to you. If you're looking for a sensor that has the most accurate target distance, then by far the Everything Presence Lite is the one you want to choose. A close second would be the ZY-M100-L if you want something that has accurate target distance but you're not breaking the bank. Alright, so here are the ones I would not recommend. First, the no-name giant black box. This sensor has no tuning and just is flat out garbage. The second I wouldn't get, and at least not yet, is the GS-200, which is the one that's not fully supported in Zigbee MQTT, because the target distance had some weird sensor issues dropping to 0, and it was really spamming the Zigbee network. Lastly, I'd steer clear of the Aqara FP1, as it really doesn't have anything to offer over its younger brother, the FP2, and it also kind of has some deficiencies, as you've seen. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, as I've put a ton of work into it, and now I think I need to just take a break from mmWave sensors. I know that I've only scratched the surface with some of these sensors, but I hope it gives you a starting point and gives you an idea of which one you should buy and test out. If there's any of these that you'd really like to see me do a full video on, let me know in the comments and maybe I can squeeze that in. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to leave some feedback in the comments and subscribe to the channel. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. See ya.